Good morning. This is the Lew Rockwell Show, and how great to have as our guest this morning, Sibel Edmonds. Sibel is an extraordinary person, a very brave person, a very principled person, somebody who was horrifically oppressed by the U.S. government. She hasn't let that stop her. Take a look at her website, Boiling Frogs Post. She's the author of Classified Woman, the Sibel Edmonds story, where I'm going to ask her to tell us a little bit about what the government did to her previously, but we're here to talk today especially about her new novel, The Lone Gladio. Now, who knew that Sibel was going to be a thriller writer? But it's quite wonderful, and it's an exciting novel. It's a truth-telling novel. It's what in the old days they would have called a roman à clef, because in a increasingly authoritarian society all throughout history, people have had to use novels to tell the truth when they couldn't actually do it in the guise of nonfiction. But Sibel, tell us first of all, and I know this is a very long topic, but what did the government do to you? Why did they do it? Why didn't you buckle?
As you know, the ACLU classified me as the most classified gagged woman in the history of the United States.
Yes.
That's because I have received most number of gag orders and the invocation of state secrets privilege repeatedly. In fact, even the congressional hearings and investigation on my case were all stopped by the Justice Department through retroactive classification invocation and the state secrets privilege invocation. I worked for less than a year for the FBI as a language specialist.
You speak 4 languages. You actually know foreign languages, unlike the people who work in the FBI normally.
Right. And because of that, even though I was initially hired as a language specialist, I ended up working with counterintelligence FBI agents as an analyst because they did not have any analysts, the FBI, the entire organization, who knew the area. And this is Central Asia, Caucasus, and all the former Soviet countries. The language is a Turkic language, and Turkish is my primary language, but I also speak Azerbaijani. So not only I did translation for them, but I regularly help them with the analysis because have to go through some newspaper articles in the country, let's say if it's Azerbaijan or it's in Turkey, and see how that relates to our case. Well, those articles would be in Turkish, and the agents wanted to find out about some significance relevant to the ongoing counterintelligence operations. So during my work with the FBI, I got to, and I became aware of some really incredible operations and cases that were ongoing from 1996 all the way till February 2002. Therefore, after I blew the whistle, the FBI and the Justice Department and also the State Department, they wanted to make sure that none of the information I learned, and we are not talking about ongoing investigations that would be jeopardized or the special techniques for surveillance that would be jeopardized if I were to talk, but the content and the operations themselves would not become public. And to prevent that, they basically, this is the Justice Department with the nudge and the push from the State Department, invoked the state secrets privilege in my case. Then they invoked it again the second time when I was asked to testify on 9/11 case by the 9/11 family members. At the time, they had a lawsuit through this legal firm, and they wanted me to be one of their witnesses and testify on certain cases and issues. So the Justice Department stepped in again, and they said, no, she cannot testify. Everything about her is classified, including her languages that she speaks, the degrees she has, the country she was born, the date of birth, they classified that. So I became the classified woman. Then when I wrote my first book, after I finished it, it was a biography, nonfiction, because I held the highest level secret clearance for security clearance for the FBI, I was obligated to submit my manuscript before publication to the FBI and have them go through the entire manuscript, see if they see anything that they consider classified. So with their black marker, they would, just cross that and say, well, this cannot be included in your book. Well, the process is supposed to be 30 days, and they have to respond to you with the redacted stuff. Do you take it out or you challenge it, then you publish. Well, in my case, that did not happen, Lou. We submitted it to the FBI. A month passed, 2 months passed, 3 months passed, nothing. Finally, I had to go and hire attorneys. The attorneys started contacting the FBI and the DOJ, and they were told that my entire book was classified. Therefore, they couldn't just black out anything. And this is the book you have read. This is the book that has been available for 3 years.
Great book, by the way, Classified Woman.
And it was Kafkaesque. We said, they said, even the page number, there is nothing in this book you can publish. And we have actually official documents and letters from DOJ saying everything in this book is classified. At that point, I had to decide, do I, back off and don't do it? Or do I say this is ridiculous, let them arrest me and take me to court and show the court and maybe juries, a team of juries, how can the entire book be classified? Okay, this would be worse than Fahrenheit 451, right? Well, I published it, and I waited to see what was going to happen as a result. And nothing happened because they truly constitutionally, not that ever stops them nowadays, they were not really able to do anything. But that was when the idea of writing a fiction was conceived. Because as I was going through this process fighting to publish this book, I was told that if you write a fiction book, you don't have to submit it to the FBI or the Justice Department or the CIA. And I had that as my plan B and saying, well, if they come and they say they're going to take all these books off the market and et cetera, I would be forced to write fiction because I had to write. I had to write the, story or stories related to this particular area. So the idea was conceived at that point, and in fact, as soon as my book was published and a few months after that, when nothing happened, I began writing this book that will be available on a very important date, and that is the September 11, 2014, the 13th anniversary of 9/11. And it's more than symbolic for me. People, when they read this book, they realize the significance of it, of course, and so I wrote it, and the idea first, even to myself, sounded preposterous, to sit down and write a novel. I never considered myself an author. I never thought I would sit down and write a novel, but somehow I convinced myself and ended up doing it. And court of public opinion would determine if it was a worthwhile effort or not, of course, and that remains to be seen.
Well, Sibel, there's a lot of extremely important information in this book. Of course, it's fun to read it as a novel. It's a thriller, as I said. It's worth it just on those grounds, but it's far more important than, I don't want to put down the novel as a form, but I mean, this book it's not just a novel. You're also in this novel telling the truth about a whole bunch of criminal activities by the government that have horrific effects of the sort of thing that's still going on today and maybe multiplied today to gin up new wars and new trouble all over the world. Tell us something about the plot of the novel and the sorts of things that you cover that you can only cover in the guise of a novel.
Sure. The context for this novel, for this story, is based on Operation Gladio. Operation Gladio was an operation, paramilitary false flag operation methods put in place during the Cold War. And this is by NATO and the United States intelligence agencies, specifically the CIA, and of course Pentagon. So they put together these paramilitary units in various countries in order to use false flag operations mainly and other sorts of set up synthetic events in order to sway the public opinions on the Soviet Union and communism, etc. Well, you would assume that such an operation, and it's already confirmed, people were to go and Google Operation Gladio.
Sure, no, it's fact.
It's an established fact that we did engage, and this is we, the United States, through NATO, through our paramilitary, and in many cases, criminal networks that we employed. We set up a lot of false flag operations, false flag bombings, terrors, etc., in order to counter, that was the premise, the Soviet power and their influence in the important critical region. Well, you'd assume that this operation would end after the Cold War ended. However, this operation didn't end, but it was expanded and modified to fit the post-Soviet Union era, because you were looking after 1990, 1991, you were looking at this area, and this is Central Asia and Caucasus, where the future of energy and resources are located, okay? Because we know the Saudi Arabias and their oil, it has a limited time stamp on it. It's not going to be as relevant in 15 years from now, Saudi Arabia, or even Iraq. The future of energy and resources, and also the pipeline, if you consider Pepe Escobar's phrase, which I love, pipelineistan, again, you're looking at this former Soviet Union states. So here we were with the Cold War ended, and we had us, the West, the United States, you have China, and you have, to a certain degree, weakened Russia, and saying whoever gets the control of this region is going to be the imperial power starting from this point on. So just as Middle East was for almost, more than half a century. And Middle East, why do you think we put our bases in Saudi Arabia? How did that come about? Why did we install Shah in Iran? All the things we did in Middle East, installing puppet regimes, bringing about coups, all those things that we did was to control those nations that control the resources. I mean, some of our listeners here may recall the OPEC crisis in 1970s, for example. I mean, what could happen if some of these countries get together and defy the West and say, if you do this, we are going to put an embargo, or we're going to make the prices of, price of oil such and such. Well, people here almost went crazy. I mean, they're like, we don't care how you get our oil, gas to us, but get us to us cheap, and we don't care what you do. So our government, and this is also United Kingdom as well, they focus on taking over these regimes, setting one against another to make sure things like that won't happen again. I mean, we had that incident, and we haven't had that incident since. It was all about energy and resources and the power. Who was the power? Who was the most powerful between the Soviet Union and the United States? Now, with the fall of the Soviet Union after 1991, we had the same situation, this time over former Soviet Union states, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and also the entire region, including Georgia. Who was going to control this? Well, we had the Chinese, with their billions of people and their dependence on energy. We have the semi-weakened Russians, and we had us. So between these three actors in the global chess game, each one had to do his or her own, its own best to take over and have the dominance of this region. With China's modus operandi and business style, what they usually do is they do it via money. They go and they cut a deal with a country. They do it currently in Africa, as we know. They do it in Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. They say, okay, we put the railroad or the pipeline here, and we want the exclusive right to this particular gas or oil development, and here we're going to give you $50 billion, et cetera, for the next 5 years. But as we know, China doesn't go and install military bases for this. How many military bases do you know that China has installed in Middle East or Africa or Central Asia or Caucasus, Lou? None.
Yeah,
that's not their method, okay? They just do straight business, maybe shrewd business, but it's still business. That to me is, pretty kosher. Then we had the Soviet Union. Soviet Union said, well, our comparative relative advantage is for the last 50 years, we had these states leaders because they were all part of the Communist Party and they were all elected or selected by the Soviet Union before the Cold War ended, and they were put in power. Plus, Russia had converted their language because the official language in those nations for the last more than half a century was Russian, their official government and school languages. So Russia relied on that, saying, well, we have cultivated these political power there. Therefore, we want to keep that. Well, for the United States, as we know, we like to do military base installments, and we like to do more cowboy style. There are few comparative advantage that we can use as our advantage for this region. This is against Central Asia. And that is, even though Russia turned their language from Turkic languages that they spoke previously to Russian, a lot of this, population in the area, they still consider themselves as Turkic heritage, okay? That's the same heritage as people in Turkey. And even though religion was forbidden, internally they had kept some of that loyalty to Islam because the religion of the region, most of the region, not all of it, is Islam. The United